Hello everybody, how we doing today? Hope y'all doing pretty good. It's Leo with the Hillbilly Files, and I have a grizzly bear of a story for you guys today. Now this is something that we've kind of touched on, and it's one of the stops on when I do my historic trail tours. But it's just like a 10-minute stop on one of my tours. You know, it's one of a dozen historic stops, but it's a really fascinating story, and it's one that is actually very important to, well, our country's development. What really happened, you know, how we came to be the America that we are today. The West Virginia Mine Wars. Now, I would imagine a lot of you have probably never even heard those words before. You know, some of you have. Some people who are into history probably have. Probably know about the West Virginia Mine Wars. And this is it's a really big story. If you look around on YouTube, I'm in Matewan, West Virginia, by the way, ATVs and stuff whipping by. If you look around on YouTube, there are very few YouTubers who have actually tackled this story, because it's just such a behemoth of a story. You know, there are literally thousands of characters in this story. You know, thousands of moving parts. To be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure that we can really do this story justice, but being a local and being that this story is kind of near and dear to our hearts, we're going to give it a shot. We're going to try, and you know, just hope for the best. Do the best we can. I'll put it that way. I'll just do the best. We'll do the best we can. Like I said, this is a really big story, and it involves a time in our country, the labor organization movement, labor unions, all of this sort of thing. And the best way that I could think of to do this was to come here and actually go to the museum. And I've got several stops that I want to show you guys today. I've got several things that I want to show y'all. But the museum, now if y'all ever come to Matewan, West Virginia, you can see that's the old depot on the end of town there. That's Wingo's. David Hatfield, he has a B&B right here. Real good people. Wingo's is right there. Kathy McCoy and Donald. Really good food. Right here, there's gift shops. This is the original town right down this way. And this is where the Matewan Massacre happened, right here on this corner, as a matter of fact. And that's going to be one of our stops a little bit later. But this right here is the old Matewan National Bank building. And it's been converted to be a museum. It's the Mine Wars Museum. They had a little one over here, and they got a grant. And they recently moved over here during, you know, just at the beginning of the COVID lockdowns. And you know, they had a rough time. You know how it is, you know, with everything being closed down. And I've been meaning to bring you guys over here a dozen times and show you this place. But for some reason, everything is always, you know how that is, how life is. This happened, that happened, and I've never gotten to bring you guys over here. But we had a little bit of time today. We were supposed to have some thunderstorms today, but it doesn't look too thunderstormy to me. So we're going to start our little tour right here in Matewan at the Mine Wars Museum, and we're going to go from there. I've got several stops that I want to show you guys. I think you'll really like this. But anyhow, I guess I hear a train coming, so I'm going to head on in. He's going to drown me out anyway here in just a few seconds. Okay, I just went in, met the young man that's taking care of it. His name is Lloyd, and really good guy. He says he's 30, but he looks 20s to me. He is actually a PhD. He's going for his PhD in West Virginia history. So this guy, he actually knows his stuff. So we are very lucky to have caught him here today. But anyhow, guys, this is Lloyd. Lloyd, this is the Hillbilly Files. Everybody else.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
We were very curious. I noticed you've got a lot of your supporters and stuff up there. I noticed that. I noticed a couple of them in particular. That one, Mayor Testerman. I noticed those. I sure did.
Yeah, a lot of the time people will, for stuff like this, they'll donate in somebody's memory, and that's what happened with that. Testerman, of course, was the mayor of Matewan around 1920 when the Battle of Matewan took place. He is one of 2 town officials who confronted the Baldwin Felts agents who came into town to evict striking miners. And at the end of the Battle of Matewan, he was one of the men who lost their life. There were theories that Sid Hatfield shot him, but there was so much chaos.
Yeah, I had heard. I had heard.
You're familiar with the theories.
Yeah,
I don't believe them myself.
I don't buy that one either. I agree with you.
It was
100%.
a big smear campaign against Sid by Thomas Felts.
Yeah, I agree. So what do you have in store for us? What's the...
So the museum, we talk about the conditions that led to the march on Blair Mountain. We basically tell the story of how miners tried to come together and unionize in southern West Virginia, the resistance that they faced from the coal companies who didn't want them to unionize, the conditions that they're living in, working conditions that led them to want to organize a union, and what they were trying to achieve by that.
Right.
And what happens is all of these grievances sort of build up. It's kind of like a pressure cooker. They build up and build up and build up, and things escalate to the point where in late August, early September of 1921, an army of 10,000 miners decide that they're going to march on Williamson to liberate miners who had been arrested and were being held without trial by a local militia group. And they were stopped by Logan County Sheriff Don Chafin, a group of his volunteers.
Right, yeah, we did a video on Don as well. Yeah, go ahead.
And they were stopped at an army of about 3,000 led by Don Chafin at Blair Mountain in Logan County. So our museum talks about everything that led to that, talks about the battle itself, and we talk about the legacy of the battle and the fight to preserve the site and the history.
A question now. There's been debate about this, and I know which way I kind of lean. In your opinion, now you're a learned, you've actually studied this. You know what I'm saying? In your opinion, would you say that the middle class sort of owes its existence to this place and events like it and that sort of thing?
I would certainly argue yes.
Because I've heard both points, and I could put up a pretty good argument for, I
mean, there were people within, like, the emerging middle class that saw this as something that they saw the chaos and they wanted order. So a few of them did align themselves with Don Chafin and form peacekeeping groups to try and keep the miners suppressed. By that same token, it is a very complicated question and a very complicated subject. But without these miners, without the union, we wouldn't have things like an 8-hour workday. We wouldn't have things like a weekend. Coal miners wouldn't be paid in government money rather than scrip.
Exactly.
And they wouldn't have the safety regulations in place that are supposed to keep miners safe now.
Right.
None of that would exist without people like Frank Keeney, Fred Mooney, and all of those. Sarah Blizzard, the women were sort of the backbone of the organizing and union movement too, because they're the ones who kept everything running while the men were out picketing, striking, and all of that.
Right.
So without all of those people, and without them making the decision to stand up and fight for their civil rights and fight for better working and living conditions, we would not have those things. We would not have many of the liberties and privileges that we enjoy now.
Right. I agree. I've always kind of leaned that way myself, to where, you know, the entire middle class, you know, places like this, you know, that was kind of their birthplace.
Yeah.
You know, and I can say, you know, any amateur historian can point to a whole bunch of other things that, you know, were also catalysts. And,
Yeah.
But it's just really cool that you know, that this sort of thing, and this story, the mine wars, is a really big story.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people involved, moving parts and all this kind of stuff, and I'm just really glad that, you know, I lucked out and got you today.
I appreciate that. And for years, this story wasn't really taught, or
Correct.
was taught in a way
Yes.
that sort of vilified the miners.
Yes. So guys, a lot of this stuff you'll hear today and see today is probably actually stuff that you have not heard before. You know, this, like the man just said, you know, there was a lot of conflicting stories. There was a lot of rumors made up to discredit, you know, one side or the other. A lot of, you know, just plain old-fashioned lies, you know. But yeah, I'm ready whenever you are.
All right, we can go through. If you have anything you in particular want me to talk about, we'll go ahead and talk a little bit about it.
Hit us, brother.
So we start with what life was like in the coal camps, where we talk about the living and working conditions that miners and their families had to endure. And one of the first things we see is this wall of check tags. And for me, this is one of the most powerful symbols of why the miners organized and why they tried to form a union. You'll see a quote up there from Guinea King. Each one of them represents a man. There's 361 tags up there, and these check tags represent a man. They would hang them at the entrance of the mine to let people know who was in the mine at any given time.
Right.
361, that's the number of confirmed dead at the Monongah mine disaster, December 6th, 1907, up in Monongah, West Virginia, which is near Fairmont. There was a gas explosion. It ripped through the mine and killed at least 361 miners, including boys as young as 10.
Right. Yeah, we've done a couple mine disasters there. Yeah.
And no single disaster has been as bad as the Monongah disaster.
Is that the biggest one?
It is still the deadliest mine
Really?
disaster in American history.
Really? No, I did not know that. Monongah. Huh. I did not know that.
And the very next year, in 1908, that's when the first federal mine legislation went into effect.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about it was, having the laws on the books is one thing, but they didn't provide for enough mine inspectors to enforce it.
Oh, really?
So a lot of the same problems, and like cutting corners on safety, like a lack of ventilation that allowed gas buildups in the first place, a lot of that can still go on because there may be only 2 or 3 mine inspectors in the state.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what's this one? Now, I've seen these.
So by the sides of this cap here, you've got carbide lamps. Up on the cap is an oil lamp.
Oh, okay.
That's what they used before the carbide lanterns.
Oh, okay. Because I've seen these, but I've never seen. one of those.
Yeah, and you can see some pictures over here of those sorts of
Oh, really?
lamps in action.
Okay.
And you can see it's just an open flame
Yeah.
coming out of the spout.
No doubt. That's not good around a gas leak. Is it?
Exactly. And it didn't provide a whole lot of light. Miners could barely see what was in front of them.
Right.
Like, it was pitch dark in the mines. Like, you couldn't see anything without these, and even this was just
Not much
tiny
better than a
improvement.
candlelight, is it?
Mm-hmm.
I guess. The soft cap, yeah, that right there should help with a rock or something, shouldn't
Right.
it? That soft cap, that should help.
Mm-hmm. If you were working a low vein of coal, which had you crawling on your hands and knees, you might have something a little bit harder on top of your head. But this isn't going to help you in case of
Yeah,
a sling
really.
fall or anything
Really?
like that.
Yeah. Kettle bottoms.
Mm-hmm. We've got one right over there.
Oh, yeah. I've actually done a couple videos on these things. And there's another one, guys. A friend of mine, we did a video, went on a camping trip, and he got hit in the head with one, with a 60-pound kettle
Oh
bottom.
my.
Exactly like this, the way that one worked, it comes out. That's exactly how it works, guys, if y'all can see that. That's why they're called kettle bottoms, too. The bottom's bigger than the top. But anyhow, go ahead, Lloyd, sorry.
So you can see photos of some of the workers that we had in the mines, or some of the workers that were employed. Up here, all young boys.
Children.
The youngest in there is probably about 8 or 9 years old.
Really?
Now, a lot of those youngins, they couldn't hold a pick or a shovel or anything like that, so they ended up getting jobs like picking slate out of the coal chute. Those are your breaker boys. Or they might be a trapper boy, the ones who sort of work the gates that sort of manipulate how the air flows through the mines.
Right, okay.
But once you got old enough to be able to hold a pick and a auger,
They moved you up.
yep. And of course, here's what they got paid in.
Yeah.
This is company scrip.
You weren't told this now when you took the job. You found out about the script part later.
Yep.
You found out about that on payday.
And you found out how much was getting taken out of your check for rent.
Exactly. You owe me $40 for working this week.
Yep. And there's a piece of script over here. We have it kind of set out from the others. Good for one loaf of bread.
Really? Now, I've never seen one like that. That is really cool. That's a unique one, isn't it?
I gotta pop out real quick.
I guess it answered your question.
Oh, yeah.
Old fella across the street seemed to be a historian on this area.
Yeah, that's James Baldwin.
Yeah, he's Baldwin Felt's hat.
Mm-hmm.
He said 2007 was when this closed. It was BB and T
All
or
right.
something.
Okay.
So that's thought I'd share that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Now I know. But yeah, you couldn't even choose what merchandise in some cases. You had to buy what the token was for.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, that is interesting.
Now, some companies did have a buyback program for scrip, but they would only pay 75%, like 75
Oh,
cents
so they
on
got
the
you
dollar.
again.
Yeah. So if you had $5 worth of scrip and you wanted to exchange it for government money, you'd only get $3.75.
Right, so they'd
Yeah.
make another profit.
Yeah, and of course every time
They were slick, weren't they?
Yep. And every time that, since you could only use the script at the company store, every time that you managed to get a pay raise or anything like that, they'd raise the prices in the store and raise your rent.
Go right back up.
Yeah, everything in a coal camp was designed essentially to claw back as much as the operators could from having to pay the miners.
Right. Yeah. Now, that right there, I heard you mentioning to the other guys. Would you mind telling?
Sure. So this is a breast auger. You might also hear it called a chest auger. And the way this worked, it would have like a bar or a plate that goes on the end right here. and you'd brace that against your chest, and you would drill into the coal face after you undercut it with a pick.
Look at that.
So once you drilled it in, you would stick your blasting charge or your dynamite into the hole, cut your fuse and light that. You'd shout fire in the hole 3 times, and then you'd get out of your room as fast as you could. And once that explosive charge blew, if you undercut the coal right, it would fall right down onto the floor.
Right.
And you could load it into your coal car.
Yeah. Now, my mom, they used, they had an old truck mines when Mom was little.
Yeah.
She used to tell me about how they used squibs with paper and gunpowder.
Yeah, that was the most common method of blasting in most West Virginia mines.
Yeah. Well, they couldn't really afford any kind of fuse, you know, and stuff like that was a lot cheaper.
And all of the equipment that the miners used, their picks, shovels, sharpening, for those things, your auger, your blasting utility, they had to pay for all of that. They had to buy it from the
They had to
company.
buy.
They had to buy their
No, I
own
didn't know
tools
that. I did
from
not
the
know
company.
that. I did not know that. Well, that makes sense. That sounds about right, don't it?
Yep. Here's something really neat. I don't know if you've done anything about the canary in the coal mine before, but this is I think it might be a reproduction. It might be the real thing, but this is a canary cage. And canaries are really, really loud birds. So miners would take canaries into the mines with them, and they're real sensitive to things like gas buildups of like methane. Now, methane, you can't taste it or see it or smell it, but a canary, if it breathes enough of it in, it'll get quiet and it might keel over either unconscious or dead.
Right.
So if your canary suddenly stopped chirping, you knew that you would hit a gas pocket and you needed to get out.
Get out of there.
So that's the kind of stuff that you're going to hear in a mine around 1900. You're going to hear explosions. You might hear the roof creaking a little bit, and you might need to shore up the roof with some timbers. And you're going to hear these birds just tweeting their heads off.
If you're lucky.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was really dark and surprisingly noisy, too.
Yeah.
These are a few household items that you might find in your typical company townhouse.
What are those?
Those confused the heck out of me the first time I saw them. Those are harmonica reed plates.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I think those were actually found by an archaeologist on Blair Mountain.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Like the
metal detecting?
Yeah, the harmonica itself would have rotted away, the wooden parts, but the reed plates would have stayed.
Right. Huh. A little teeny salt shaker. Oh,
No,
sorry.
you're fine.
After you.
All right. So here's where we get into the first big strike, the Paint Creek and Cabin Creek strike in 1912 and 1913. This is happening along 2 tributaries of the Kanawha River. Here's a map of the strike area. This is happening between Charleston and Fayetteville. So Kanawha and Fayette counties. And the miners here went on strike with a series of demands. They wanted an end to the mine guard system. To keep the miners in line, mine owners would hire armed guards from the local population, and if they thought they needed a little bit of extra firepower, they'd bring in private detectives like the Baldwin Phelps agents. So they wanted an end to that. They wanted to be paid in government money.
Real money.
They wanted fair pay with their own check weighman, the person who weighed out the coal and figured out how much you were getting paid. And they wanted paid by the ton instead of what a lot of mine owners used, which was called a long ton. So they get in the mines and they think they're having to mine so many tons of coal, which a ton is 2,000 pounds, of course. So after a while, they figure out they're not getting paid as much as they should be. And they find out that the mine owners have said, oh, no, you're not getting paid for a short ton. You're getting paid for a long ton. So they were trying to get an extra 140 pounds of coal out of these miners, basically trying to get them to mine more coal for less pay.
Right. Huh. I guess. So the long ton was just weighed more, basically.
Yeah.
Really? So we'll just call it that. And okay. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. And back to the mine guards real quick. Part of their job was spying on the miners. The operators knew that people were trying to organize a union, and the mine guards would sit in and spy on union meetings. They'd break up any group of more than 3 people who was in the street thinking they might be talking about unionizing.
Yeah.
If they found out that you were trying to organize a union, they would not only fire you, they would evict you and your family from your house because the company owned it, and they would put you on a blacklist, which would guarantee that you would never work in another coal mine in West Virginia. Blacklist, it was shared among all the different mine operators, and if your name was on that list, it's telling all these other mine operators, do not hire this man.
Right.
He is an agitator.
He's a troublemaker. Yeah. Makes sense. It makes sense. I didn't know that they had collaborated quite to that level. I mean, I knew there was some, but I didn't know that they had collaborated to that level.
Yeah, they all talked to each other, and they all had their own operators associations too.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
And a lot of that was kind of in response to the union. They figured if the
You're going to unionize,
organize,
we will
organize.
too. Yeah. Makes sense.
And once the strikers were evicted, they and their families moved into tent colonies. There was one right up here in Holly Grove. That one becomes particularly famous or infamous thanks to the Bull Moose special. Have you done anything on that yet?
I do a little bit of it in my tour, but I haven't really done any on the videos.
Sure. So for months at a time, miners would live in tents like this one. This is a replica of what a striking miner might have lived in. They varied in size, but the union would provide tents and strike relief. That's kind of a fragile piece, and it's a little bit after the Mine Wars, but that is a New Testament written in Hungarian.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
I guess. I won't open it, but I'll show it to you guys. It's really old then, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were a lot of immigrant miners. There were a lot of African-American miners. At the Battle of Blair Mountain, it's estimated about 25% of the miners who marched were African-American. So this is a very diverse, multi-ethnic, multiracial community that we're talking about.
I mentioned in the tours a lot, you know, they only had 2 choices. We can stand together or we can die, you know, you get to take your pick. You know, which one you like the best.
And part of hiring immigrants was to try and frustrate a little bit of that.
Yeah.
You have that language barrier.
Right.
Makes
Separate
it hard to
them.
communicate.
Divide and conquer.
The thing is, though, a lot of those immigrant miners, especially the ones from like southern Italy, they came from backgrounds that were already pretty familiar with organized labor. You have a lot of socialists in these
European
groups.
Yeah.
Their word for union, of course, was sindacato. That's the Italian for
syndicate.
Union.
Yeah. Oh, really? I didn't know that. I didn't know that's what that meant. I'd heard, you know, the syndicate, you know, of course, but I didn't know that.
If you watch the movie Matewan, the Italian family, as they're trying to get the Italian miners to join with the union, they start talking about sindacato.
Yeah, I've seen it, but man, it's been many years since I've watched it. I need to watch it again.
when they finally join with the striking miners, they start singing the song La Bandera Rosa, which means the red flag. So they're singing a lot of like these labor songs. So there is that strong labor tradition already there in their culture.
Right. Okay, cool.
So here's where we talk about the Bull Moose Special. It was a chartered train that Baldwin Felts rented from the railroad company. And it was an armored train, and it had this armored car that had rifle ports, machine guns. It was basically a traveling fortress. And one evening in 1913, it was February 7th, this train rolls up past the Holly Grove tent colony and just starts firing into the tents. And it killed and wounded a lot of miners. So in response to that, a lot of women, such as Sarah Blizzard right here, they decided that they were going to fight back their way. And they would use tools like this pry bar here. They would use tools like pry bars and chisels and stuff like that, and they started ripping up the railroad tracks.
Mm-hmm.
So the Bull Moose Special couldn't come back through. Like, there's an account from Sarah Blizzard talking about ripping up the railroad tracks, and the train is starting to come through, and it has to stop, and they're just standing off by the side of the tracks just laughing at them because they can't go any further.
So was that the one with the Gatling gun, right?
It would have had a Gatling gun on it, yes.
Right, okay.
But during this 1912 and 1913 strike, the governor of West Virginia, William Glasscock, had to declare martial law 3 separate times to keep the peace. And eventually a settlement was reached. Glasscock's successor, Henry Hatfield, Governor Henry Hatfield, served as sort of a mediator between the strikers and the mine owners, and the miners managed to get every one of their demands except for one, and that was recognition of the Union.
Right.
Yeah. So even though they managed to get slightly better conditions, the mine owners still didn't have to bargain with
the union itself. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're still one-on-one.
Right. So things sort of cooled down a little bit after 1913 and really started. There's a pretty big break after the United States gets into World War I. And a lot of that has to do with the United States government actually seized control of the mines. They had their own, to keep the war machine running, they basically created a national coal board that would sort of mediate labor disputes and make concessions to the workers to make sure that they had enough coal to fuel ships and fuel the foundries and that sort of thing.
I didn't know they'd done that. I knew they did it like with rubber for war, but
the railroads.
I guess that makes sense. You would need the coal too. That makes perfect sense.
But there's an important ideological thing that comes out of World War I too. When Wilson was making the case for war in 1917, when President Wilson was making the case for why we needed to join in this war an ocean away, he said that the United States had to join for this fight to make the world safe for democracy. And once the miners got back, they quickly realized that they had known this for a while, but a lot of the rights that they had been fighting to secure in France, a lot of that democracy that they had been fighting for, they were not enjoying
at home.
Yeah. Because basically in southern West Virginia, the companies, they run everything. They have their own police. They have they're private detectives. They're the government in these company towns, and they have enough influence in the state legislature and the courts to basically run roughshod over these miners.
Right. Anybody who spoke. Right.
With extreme prejudice, yeah. And there's in the middle of this first Red Scare, the powers that be in Charleston are worried that if these miners start to rise up again, it could be something really, really big. There were big strikes in Seattle and other big cities in the U.S., so the West Virginia state legislature starts passing laws that make it harder for miners to organize. They pass stuff like the red flag law, which makes it illegal to fly a socialist or a communist flag. Now, most of the miners were not communist. You would have had a few that were socialist or at least leaned left, but they were voting for the people who they saw as able to affect change.
Right. Right.
Like, they were voting for the people who they believed would make their lives better, because the two major
If it
parties
went the other way, they're going to die too.
Yeah, the two major parties in Charleston, they were both in the pockets of the coal companies.
Right.
It's also in 1919 that the West Virginia State Police is formed, and it's formed in direct response to stuff like the Paint Creek and Cabin Creek strike. It's formed to take the pressure off the National Guard and have a permanent armed force that can
respond to that sort of thing.
Labor unrest. Yeah.
I guess.
Right.
Is that Sid's badge?
I'm not sure if it's his badge specifically, but it's a badge like he.
I was about to freak out, man.
You can see it just under his coat too in the film reel there.
Yeah. I've seen this video. I always did I like Sid. I always did like him.
And on the other side, you have some Baldwin Felts badges.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I really love this juxtaposition.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Of course, these just about everybody had a badge back then, and I'd heard a story that that a lot of times when these mines were hiring their thugs, which the word thug comes from here, it meant these...
Yeah, gun thugs.
Right. I heard a story that said that they only had one question when they were hiring, just for the thugs, not the contractors like,
Right.
Baldwin Felts, that they only had one question. They would ask you if you were willing to shoot a baby. And if you said yes, you got the job. If you said no, you didn't.
My goodness.
That was they didn't ask about your health or education or anything else. If I tell you to shoot a baby, will you do it? Was the question.
Who are you willing to kill for this company?
Are you willing to kill anyone I tell you to kill? If you are, you're hired. If not, I'm going to go on to the next guy. Wild, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's a picture of the old train station, which would have been on the other side of those tracks. And the placement of this window is near perfect.
Yes.
You've probably recorded it already, but you've got the bullet holes on the corner of that building. You can look at where the Battle of Matewan actually took place.
Yeah. You can see the bullets. There's a stop sign right over there. If you stand by the bullets, you can see exactly where that dude was standing. He was standing right over that stop sign. But yeah, when I get done here, I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna go Sid's old office and his grave for sure.
Yeah.
And try to cover some stuff today. While I'm out.
Which you know how they're renovating the Ninny building down there.
Yeah.
We're going to have an interpretive space that'll talk a little bit about. We want the focus to be sort of immigration and like the blending of cultures in the Tug Valley.
Right.
But we're also going to have a few things to talk about Sid Hatfield, since that was where he lived towards the end of his life.
Right. Yeah. I'm a big fan of Sid's. I'm a big Sid fan.
You and me both. I've got a sticker of him on my laptop.
Do you really? Do you?
It's one of the stickers that we sell.
I have to get one. I have to get one before I leave.
So, Battle of Matewan, May 19th, 1920. Have you told the story on your channel before?
I briefly mentioned it a while back, but I would rather.
Sure.
You're the.
Yeah. So on May the 19th, 1920, a group of Baldwin Felts detectives arrives in town that morning to carry out evictions for the Stone Mountain Coal Company. Among those Baldwin Felts detectives are Albert and Lee Felts. They're the brothers of Thomas Felts, who with William Baldwin runs the Baldwin Felts Agency. And waiting for them as soon as they arrive in town, Mayor Testerman and Police Chief Sid Hatfield meet them and ask them what their business is in town, and they explain that they're carrying out these evictions. Mayor Testerman asks to see a warrant, and they have one. The mayor takes a look at it and says, "This warrant's no good. You're going to have to go back up to Charleston and get a judge to sign off on one." And they argue back and forth a little bit. Eventually, the Baldwin Felts guys go about their business, and that evening they're coming back to catch the 5 o'clock train back to Bluefield. And they come up and they're confronted by Sid and Mayor Testerman again, and they start arguing about the same stuff. Someone pulls a warrant for Sid's arrest, and at this point the Baldwin Felts guys are waiting on the train tracks. Their guns are stowed away in cases.
Right.
And as this argument gets more and more heated, a shot rings out. So Sid pulls his guns. He was kind of notorious for carrying 2 pistols with him. And shots start ringing out all over the place, not just from Sid, but from the windows up above the street too. And through this fight it's over in about 2 minutes or so. It's a really, really short fight. But at the end of it, 7 Baldwin Felts agents are dead, including the Felts brothers. The mayor is mortally wounded, and another couple of miners have been shot as well. It gets reported in the local news media as the Matewan Massacre. We prefer to use the term the Battle of Matewan. Massacre makes it seem like Sid was this ruthless killer. And that's kind of part of the smear campaign against Sid, too, that Thomas Felts started.
Yes.
So here we have a picture of Sid with Jessie Hatfield. She was Jessie Testerman. She was married to the mayor. And a few months after the Battle of Matewan, Sid and Jessie got married.
Right.
They were actually arrested in Huntington for indecency when they were there to actually get married. And Thomas Felts started spreading this nasty rumor that Sid had killed Testerman himself to get to Jessie.
Right. From what I heard, that was Testerman's last request, was he asked Sid to take care of Jessie.
That's how Sid talked about it, I'm pretty sure.
Obviously neither of us was there. I can remember hearing that, though. I remember reading that.
So after the battle, a few months later, there's about 20 men arrested. They're all right here. These are the defendants in the Matewan Massacre trial. And the trial lasts through the winter of 1920 and 1921. And there's a lot of drama that goes into it too. There's this man, Ance Hatfield, who is a relative of Devil Ance. He agrees to testify against Sid. He ends up dying under mysterious circumstances. C.E. Lively, a restaurateur who also worked as a UMWA organizer, takes the stand and reveals himself as a spy for Baldwin Felts, and he has to get out of town pretty darn quick after
no doubt.
Blows his own cover. The jury in Williamson eventually turns back a not guilty verdict for all of the defendants. But Sid's legal troubles don't end there. If you hold on one second, I think someone just came in.
Okay, we'll come back to it. Okay, ready.
All right. So Phelps has basically sworn on revenge on Sid Hatfield for the death of his two brothers. And once the verdict comes back in Williamson not guilty, and Sid's cleared of charges, he figures out that no jury in Mingo County is ever going to convict Sid Hatfield of anything. He's too popular. He was already well admired before the battle.
Yeah.
The battle basically turned him into a folk hero. So he gets it worked out to where Sid has to go and answer for charges in McDowell County. He has to go to Welch to for his arraignment and to respond to those charges. Had something to do with a fight a couple of years prior to that. But it's pretty obvious to almost everybody that this is some sort of a trap.
Right.
And the sheriff of McDowell County promised Sid and his deputy Ed Chambers, who was also charged, that they would have safe passage while they were in McDowell County.
Right. I heard they were told to come unarmed as well.
Yeah, they were told to come unarmed to the courthouse. They were armed while they were traveling, but they got into town, they got into their hotel, left their guns in the hotel, and they went to eat before going to the courthouse. C.E. Lively was in the restaurant with them, and they kind of noticed it, exchanged whatever pleasantries you could possibly exchange with someone like C.E. Lively. And once they left, Lively followed them up to the courthouse. And they've got a sheriff's deputy with them. The sheriff himself ended up having to go out of the county for some reason. And as they're climbing up the steps to the McDowell County Courthouse in Welch, this deputy just steps out of the way, and a group of men led by C.E. Lively, Baldwin Phelps men, just open fire and shoot Sid and Ed Chambers. They just kill two unarmed men in broad daylight. An eyewitness said that Lively himself stepped out to perform the coup de grace, so to speak, and put a bullet right in Ed Chambers' head after he'd fallen. Another eyewitness who was there said that they shot them down like dogs.
Right.
And this was really kind of the final straw.
Yeah.
Everything that had been building up over the last 20 years finally ignites, thanks to the assassination of Sid Hatfield and Ed Chambers. Lively and his men are put on trial. They're acquitted. Apparently nobody in broad daylight saw this happen.
Right. Yeah.
And the leadership of District 17 and about 5,000 miners gathered in Charleston, and Fred Keeney and Frank Mooney, who were the executive officers of the district, District 17 UMWA, they demanded to see Governor Ephraim Morgan and get him to put a stop to all of this that's going on. By this point in Mingo County, there are citizens' militias who are rounding up miners. Martial law is declared, and there's a group of miners being held in Williamson without trial. So they try to get those miners released. They try to get some sort of justice. They try to get the governor to intervene on their side, and he refuses to even see them. So it's that point that Keeney and Mooney go in front of the miners who have gathered in front of the Capitol. And there's a really good quote from Keeney down here. "You have no recourse now but to fight. The only way you can get your rights is with a high-powered rifle." So he sent them all home and told them to wait for marching orders.
That's how you do that, isn't it?
Yep. So after Sid Hatfield's funeral, they start planning this march to Mingo County. They're going to liberate the miners who are being held themselves.
Right.
Miners commandeered trains. There was some poor sap. He was a pianist who was just playing in a bar one evening, and they told him to get on a train. You're going to Mingo with us to fight against these mine guards. And he was pretty scared. They had a gun in his face, and this guy who had nothing to do with any of this.
Conscripted.
Yeah, he got conscripted into the miners' army, so to speak.
Huh.
But the battle itself takes place over 3 days in early September 1921. So September 1st, 2nd, and 3rd is when the fighting really happens.
Uh-huh.
And here's a map that shows the route that the miners took. They set out from Marmet in right around here and marched through Boone County, and to get to Mingo they had to go through Logan County, which was controlled by Don Chafin. He was the sheriff of Logan County. He was very anti-union.
Right.
The companies were paying him off, and if you tried to organize in Logan County, you'd be lucky if you just ended up on the other side of the county line with a couple of black eyes.
Yeah. He was supposedly the first road rage incident in West Virginia back in the day. Somebody had passed him, and he didn't like it, so he pulled him over and shot him.
I'd believe that. And Chafin had actually been shot a couple of years before this by a UMWA miner.
Mm-hmm.
He was in Charleston, and a miner, there was an argument, and he really got into it with this miner and got shot, but he lived. So once they get down through almost to Logan County, almost to Blair Mountain, where they're eventually going to fight, and Mother Jones shows up again. She had been one of the key figures in the fight to organize. She was a professional organizer for the UMWA, and she sees that this is starting to spiral completely out of control. So she shows up to the Miners' March, and she has a piece of paper that she says is a telegraph from President Harding. And she says that she has guarantees that the president is going to intervene and make sure that the miners
on their side.
He's going to intervene on the side of the miners and make sure that they get their demands if they all go home. So Frank and Fred, Frank Keeney and Fred Mooney, ask to see the piece of paper, and she won't show it to them. It's a fake. But at this point, things are getting so desperate that she feels like she needs to convince these miners to go home at any cost.
Right.
And Frank and Fred expose this as a phony telegraph, and that's the last time that Mother Jones was ever seen in West Virginia. Like, she left almost heartbroken. Like, she referred to the miners as her boys.
Yeah.
And to have them turn on her like that just shows how far things had come.
Right. She had supported.
Yeah. And eventually Frank Keeney and Fred Mooney, they end up going to Ohio to wait this storm out too. So the district officer on the ground is Bill Blizzard. He gets a reputation as being the general of this miners' army. So the first skirmishes, they take place the evening of August 30th, and The battle starts off along that ridge line. And you end up fighting for 3 days, around 10,000 miners estimated, against 3,000 of Don Chafin's sheriff's deputies, volunteer defenders, West Virginia State Police, mine
Baldwin
guards.
Felts, yeah.
There were some Baldwin Felts. And there's bullets whizzing around everywhere. The current estimate is only about 100 people maybe got killed. But you can still go up there today and still find shell casings. And there was talk about using airplanes to bomb the miners. Don Chafin's men actually commandeered an airplane and dropped a bomb that looked kind of like this. It didn't go off near anybody.
I read that somewhere too, that the Battle of Blair Mountain was the very first time that airplanes were used in combat.
Very first time they were used in a civil disturbance. They had been used in World War One,
right?
But U.S. Air Corps General Billy Mitchell, he wanted to use this as a test case for how air power could be used to suppress like a domestic uprising.
Civil unrest.
Yeah, civil unrest.
Right, that sort of thing.
And
so oh, well, okay.
There's a quote of his right up there. You understand we wouldn't try to kill these people at first. We'd drop tear gas all over the place. If they refused to disperse, then we'd open up with artillery and everything.
Yeah.
But you can see this is just a really crude thing. It's a pipe bomb. They just hauled it up in the plane and tossed it out the side.
It's about, 3 foot long, guys?
3 foot?
Something like that. It looks wild, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a picture.
And the idea to steal a plane and use it to bomb these miners probably came out of news reports from the Tulsa race riots or the Tulsa race massacre. Which, not to go into too much detail there, but a prominent black neighborhood was burned to the ground by a white mob.
Really?
So there was a young African-American man who was accused of sexually assaulting a white woman, and the mob assembled and basically burned down this very affluent black neighborhood. It was called Black Wall Street because it was one of the richest African-American neighborhoods in the country. And we still don't know how many people died.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I guess. Is that Don's old house?
I don't think it's his. If you see up here, you see an airplane crashed into it.
Oh, yeah. It kind of looks like his old house over in Logan, doesn't it? It has the fence, the porch on it. It kind of looks like Don's old house.
It'd be a beautiful irony if it was.
Yeah, if it was, wouldn't it? If the plane fell on his house, how cool would that have been? Okay.
So, by September 3rd, you have federal troops starting to arrive. There's a general on the ground already. His name is Harry Bandholtz. He has seen action in the Philippines and in World War One, and he's the one that gets sent to observe the situation and determine if further reinforcements are needed. And he is the one talking to the miners' leadership, trying to get them to go home. And he basically says, if you miners don't disperse and go home, the federal army is going to have to come here, and we're going to have to put an end to this ourselves. And the arrival of federal troops is enough to finally get the miners to lay down their arms and go home.
Go talk a little bit.
And the miners, they didn't see themselves as fighting against the United States. They saw themselves as patriots who were standing up for their civil rights.
Definitely.
So they weren't about to take up arms against
The government. Their own country.
Yeah, and a lot of these miners, they had served in World War One, so they were facing against the same people who they had just served with in France.
Right.
And a lot of the miners actually brought their service weapons with them. We have a Springfield over here. It wasn't used at the battle, but you would have seen rifles like that.
Mm-hmm.
A few miners even wore their service uniforms.
That's a pretty old one, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. I think that one's from the 1940s.
I've got a 37 Lee Enfield at the house.
Oh, beautiful.
Love it. It's my daddy's baby.
I'll bet. So in the aftermath of the battle, which there were machine guns deployed at the battle site, this piece is actually a little newer than what would have been used. You probably would have seen your Browning water-cooled things, like the ones with the big water tanks on them.
Uh-huh.
So this is here to represent that, but it's a little bit more recent than what you would have seen.
Right. Air cooled, too.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the short run, the Battle of Blair Mountain was a disaster for the UMWA. About 500 miners, including Bill Blizzard, Frank Keeney, and Fred Mooney, were arrested and brought on charges from disturbing the peace all the way up to treason. And these treason trials happened in Jefferson County, West Virginia. The courthouse, I don't know if it was the same building, but it was the same county, at least, that John Brown was tried for treason for his raid on Harper's Ferry.
Okay.
And this is a cell door from that jail.
I figured it was something. I was wondering about that.
Yeah, we've actually got an entire cell, but we don't have a place to put it.
Well, yeah. I figured this was something. I saw that sitting there earlier. That's got to be from something.
Mm-hmm. And eventually, most of the miners ended up being acquitted. Some received short prison terms. One man only served about 4 years. He was paroled in 1925. The UMWA went bankrupt in its defense fund, like paying for lawyers to represent all of the miners.
Right.
And union membership in West Virginia plummeted after the Battle of Blair Mountain. You went, I think it may actually say up here, by 1928, you have fewer than 1,000 miners in the UMWA.
Mm-hmm.
Compare that to 1921 when 10,000 miners marched on Blair Mountain.
Right.
And there were many more than that in West Virginia.
It was a lot bigger than most people realize.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually, I had an inkling, but it's actually, I believe, a little bit bigger than I realized.
And that you're still finding stuff on the mountain.
All the time.
And this is kind of, I don't like the term crown jewel, but it's kind of the star of our collection.
Uh-huh.
This is a Winchester Model 1873 that was found on Blair Mountain.
Really?
A lot of miners, rather than surrender their weapons, just hid them in tree stumps, buried them,
right?
Just hid them so they could come back for them later.
Yeah.
And
this was one of those.
Yeah, this was one of those.
Wow. That is amazing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
A gun from the Battle of Blair Mountain, guys. Look at that. One of a kind. Bet you ain't seen another one of these today, have you?
And that takes us to really what we're trying to do with this museum. The genesis for our museum came with the protests around the listing and delisting of Blair Mountain from the National Register of Historic Places. It was zoned for strip mining, and coal operators wanted to get at the coal under it,
Right.
and they filed a petition with the State Historic Preservation Office and the federal government to get it delisted, and that's a whole can of worms that I can't really get into today, but there was a massive protest in 2011 to save Blair Mountain from the strip mining, and you had about 5,000 people marching from Charleston to Blair over the course of about 2 weeks. And the fight eventually paid off in 2018. The battle site was relisted on the National Register, and it's protected under that sort of federal law today.
Really? Well, that's good. That's cool.
So here's one of the helmets that I was talking about if you were in low coal that you might wear.
Right.
That one's made out of leather. We have a couple others that might be made out of bakelite.
I guess.
And it's got those little...
The ridges?
yeah, those ridges in there they're for ventilation.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, keep your
that
head
does
from
make sense
sweating
now
too
that you
much.
mentioned that. I was kind of, I kind of rolled through my mind. I wonder what the little ridges for. That makes perfect sense. It certainly does.
But around the New Deal is when the long-term victory comes about for the miners. Once Franklin Roosevelt gets into office and starts implementing all this New Deal legislation, including the National Industrial Recovery Act and the National, it's called the Wagner Act. So NERA and the Wagner Act, they both contain language that specifically states that workers have a right to organize and form unions.
Right.
Wagner's National Labor Relations Act, but that's just a little detail. But it's during the New Deal that John L. Lewis over here, he didn't necessarily agree with Roosevelt on a lot, but he realized the benefits that the New Deal would yield for his miners. John L. Lewis was the president of the UMWA for over 40 years. And thanks to that New Deal legislation and his sort of personality, he basically became the face of organized labor for decades. And the UMWA became the largest labor union in the United States of America during the New Deal.
Yeah. Pointing at his own picture?
I think he said something about this picture, like, if I had to wake up to and see this picture in my house, I'd be terrified. I think the quote's right over here. I'd hate on a dark night and in a close place to meet a man of that character.
Well, at least he was a little humility.
Yeah.
A little sense of humor.
Yeah, he had at least something of a sense of humor.
Lord, I very much appreciate you, man. I really do. This
Hey,
has
I
been
appreciate you coming in.
this has been really enlightening.
Is there anything else you want to know about?
Everything, but you know, I guess we can do all that today.
Within a YouTube video.
I guess I'm going to go check out some of the sites still as well.
All right, let me give you one of those stickers.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And guys, they have a gift shop here as well. If y'all come up here, several books about the subject and t-shirts and stuff. You have been, I love that. I love that. Smiling Sid. I'll put that on my side-by-side. Shore's World.
Heck yeah.
Well, Lloyd, thank you.
Thank you, Leo.
I very much appreciate you,
It was
man.
a pleasure.
This has been an absolute pleasure, man. I have no doubt this is going to be, a really good video.
I really thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Now, I'm going to head on out here, guys. Okay, now this spot right here, I know I've showed you guys this before. This is right across the street from the museum. This is the site of the Battle of Matewan, the Matewan Massacre. And those are the bullet holes from the Matewan Massacre. If you look, you can see this old boy was over there where that stop sign is where these bullets were fired from. But I can't stay but just a minute. There's a train coming. He's going to drown me out. But I just wanted to stop here real quick and just show you this one real fast since the train was coming. Like I said, I've stopped here before. If you want to check this one out in more detail, we have another video or two that has this side in it. Okay, all right, heading out. Time to go head on out to the sites, right? Once the train passes, that is. Now this is the old Matewan City Hall, the old city lockup. This was Sid Hatfield's actual office, still standing. It was built in 1908. And you can see the city hall right there. And look how big the building is. Let me get right here, let me get to the end of it. It's, I'm gonna say 35 feet, something like that, by about 20 feet, 25 feet, something like that, maybe. It's not as long this way as it is that way. But this is Sid's old office. And what I find interesting about it, about the mine wars and law enforcement in general, is that at a time, you see, at the time, obviously, the police, they had badges, right? You all know that. Police had badges. The Baldwin Phelps detective agents, they had badges. The Pinkertons, they had badges. Everybody had a badge. Everybody. They all claimed to be legal lawmen. There was a difference. You see, Don Chafin, for example, he was the sheriff, and we did a video about him as well. We did a whole video just about him. But his involvement in the mine wars, at Battle of Blair Mountain, I just find it very interesting that the different tacks that these two lawmen took. Don Chafin, for example, we'll do him first. Don, he took the course that I will kill anybody that a rich coal baron gives me money to kill. Simple as that. And Sid here, he took a completely different track. He took the track that I will fight for you until death. And that's exactly what he did. And that is why Sid is so well loved here. And, he may not be a famous name the rest of the world over, but Sid Hatfield's a well-known name here. He's a famous man here. This man died, he died a martyr, He literally fought. But thought I'd show you the town real quick. This is Matewan this is the view Sid would have had coming out of his office. The town, it's very small, Matewan. I don't know if y'all ever been here, but it starts right here at the crossing and it ends right there. That's the entire town right there. We're going to go to his grave next. It's not far from here. You just go right across the bridge up on the Kentucky side. He's buried in Kentucky. That's actually Kentucky on the other side of the river. We're in West Virginia now. But he was actually carried from here. He was carried all the way over and up to the graveyard. We're going to his grave next. I'll see you guys there. Okay, now this is just right across the bridge from Matewan, West Virginia in Kentucky. You cross the bridge, come up a little dirt road. It's the old radio station, used to be right there for years. But this is Buskirk, and a little cemetery up on top of the hill. And if you walk right around here, look how pretty it is. Just the grass and the trees, and very peaceful place. And right around there is where we're going, just on the other side of that chain link fence. Right behind that bush right there is where we're going. Now, Sid is up here. Mayor Testerman is up here. Ed, the deputy who went with Sid and got murdered and died with Sid, is here as well. Right here is Sid Hatfield's grave. Mayor Testerman is buried right beside of him. And like in the story, that Sid supposedly killed the mayor and so he could get his wife. Yeah, like Lloyd said, that's total, that's made up story. Mayor Testerman actually, in theory, from what I hear, his last request was to ask Sid to take care of his wife. But this is Sid's grave right here. This man meant a lot to these people. He was a hero. He was a real life hero to these people. He was willing to, to fight for them, to do what was necessary to protect them and their families. And quite frankly, that's why everyone loved him so much. So when they murdered the man, that's when everything went wild. But like I said, there's Mayor Testerman right beside of him. And we have one more. I want to show you this real quick. Dedicated to the memory of Sid Hatfield for distinguished service and self-sacrifice in the cause of labor and advancement of the United Mine Workers of America. And if you'll notice, right there on the bottom of this, I've pointed this out before. That little term, "we will never forget." And that's where they are. Ed is right down here. He was a good friend of Sid's. I don't know if they were best friends or not, but they were good friends. And Ed went with him to this hearing, and that's where the Baldwin Felts, the mine thugs, the coal barons had murdered them right on the courthouse steps. Edward Chambers, November 8th, 1899 to August 1st, 1921. God defends the right. Killed at Welch, West Virginia in McDowell County by the Felts detectives. And right here is his grave. Right there. Good friends right up there. And there's several other Hatfields in this graveyard as well. If I'm not mistaken, I believe I read that a couple of the Baldwin Felts detectives are buried up here, if I'm not mistaken. But that'd be a little bit kind of strange, wouldn't it? Be buried next to the guys who killed you. It'd be a little bit weird, wouldn't it? But pretty place, isn't it? Just a beautiful old cemetery up on top of a mountain. And that's Matewan over that way. That's the town of Matewan. But it's just kind of, like I said, it's one of those things where he's kind of been lost to history, sort of. I mean, there are people who know about this story and know about Sid and Mayor Testerman and Ed Chambers and what happened, but there are a lot more who don't. You know, it's not quite lost history, but it is obscured history. She's not so obscure now, though, is she? She's on YouTube, and as long as YouTube exists, this story will live, won't it? Anyway, Ed, Sid, and Mayor Testerman, you guys rest well. You did good. Thank you all for watching today. Hope we showed you something cool. Something maybe you didn't know before. Maybe learned something. Some little historical tidbit. Anyway, rest well, folks. And to the rest of you, I guess we'll see you next time on the Hillbilly Files. You guys have a great day, and we'll talk to you later. Leo out.